So welcome again, everyone. My name is Jessica Allison. Good morning. If you are in the North American hemisphere and it is morning, and then I get worse and worse as time zones as you move right or left across the map. So happy whatever time of day it is for you. Thank you for joining us for the Drive kickoff today. This is going to be an exciting event, and we're really, really pumped up to talk about product innovation this morning. So hopefully you're here ready to learn from these great leaders in the Richmond area about product innovation and what it means for their companies, what it's meant for their career, and how you bring it to life in terms of disruption, market-changing products that are brought to life and really built for customers and to make the world a better place. We're going to hear today about the tools and techniques, the mindset that these women bring to their craft. And you're going to ideally take away that it's not a light bulb moment in the shower that really great products and ideas come from, though those help, of course, right? But it takes thought and competitive analysis and application of techniques and discovery and really knowing who your customers are, what drives your business and brings value. And we're going to figure out how these women do that. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to our amazing panelists for some introductions. And then we'll dive in and we're going to go deep today. But as you hear from our panelists, feel free to type questions into the chat and let's make this conversational. So Ashley, can I turn it over to you? Welcome.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you, Jessica. That's a great introduction. I appreciate that. Hi, everybody. I'm Ashley Chauvel, and I'm a design strategist and design thinking consultant. I help organizations innovate by improving their customer connection and the way they work. My background is in advertising, consumer research and insights, with a couple of stints starting my own beverage and photography companies along the way, teaching at university, and now consulting. So I'm really excited to be here and share what I know. Thanks so much for having me.
Welcome. All right. Our second panelist, Tibe, will you introduce yourself, please?
Of course. Good morning. Thanks for having me. My name is Tibe Bassi. I'm currently Vice President of Customer Experience at Dominion Energy. I'm new to Dominion, so I've been here about 8 months. My background, though, is in all things customer and innovation related. So operations, strategy, design, marketing, and a little bit of everything in between.
We're so excited to hear from your experiences today. All right, and last but certainly not least, Ku, would you please introduce yourself for our audience?
Good morning. I'm happy to be here today. My name is Ku, and I've been in product development for about 20 years, working for companies like Heinz, Nestle, ADM, in the flavor division, and as laid off in Sabra. So recently I've started my own company consulting, and my focus is to be on in small businesses, bringing some of the knowledge and the tools that I've acquired over the years. And I wanted to focus on small businesses because they don't have the resources of well-established companies, but they still have products that consumers will benefit from. And so that's why I chose that line of work and consulting for that group. Thank you.
Wonderful. So as you hear from these amazing women and you want to get connected, I'm going to drop their LinkedIn profiles in the chat. If you want to know more about their backgrounds or again, connect on that point that really resonates with you, please feel free to use that platform to keep the conversation going. That's what this is all about, is building up our community and those connections. So before we jump into it, I am going to stop screen sharing so that the focus is on our wonderful experts and their stories. So give me just a second to stop that. And I'm going to turn it over for our first question, just to kick us off here this morning. And we talk about innovation, and it seems to me like it could be a bit of an umbrella term. What does innovation mean in each of your roles? And how have you known when you were doing something innovative? Just to bring a little context to this big bucket of innovation, what does that mean to each of you? Ashley,
I'll go ahead and go first. Sure. So innovation for me as a design strategist is really about leading culture forward in a positive way. And it sounds like a very lofty goal, but that is that is what I try to do. That's what keeps me going and engaged. Working with lots of different clients and different that tends to be the common denominator. And so inherent in that mission is human connection, creativity, and originality, responsibility and accountability. And it's a never-ending mission, right? And so it just means having a thoughtful connection with your customers. And there's also an ethically conscious piece to it as well, which I like. And I'll share an example. Jessica asked us to share lots of stories, so I'll share an example by way of a story that really kind of brought this home for me. But early in my career in advertising, we were approached by a major financial client who wanted a campaign targeting women about investing. And they had asked us to compare the way that women buy shoes and clothes to investing. And they were convinced that this is how women relate. So we did our research and we talked with female investors. And what we learned was amazing. We learned that these women were not unafraid or uninformed about investing. In fact, it was quite the opposite. They took notice of the world around them, and they said things like, I knew when I couldn't find a parking spot at Target that it was time to invest in Target. You know, obviously this was many years ago, but and you know, things like, I knew when I couldn't find this particular toy for Christmas that we needed to invest in Mattel because those companies were onto something. And so so we ended up coming up with this tagline that said, the market, you created them. And I love sharing that story for a couple of reasons. One, because it's very typical in a lot of engagements that I do, that a client will come to us and say, we need to fix this thing. And what ends up happening is we reframe the problem, and we learn through research that, you know, that problem that we was an assumption, really, and it's really very different than what we thought. And that happens probably 85 to 90% of the time. I also share that story because it's about women. It's about you know, we ended up we were excited about it. You know, when you ask how does it feel when you are involved in something innovative, it felt like, whoa, we are definitely onto something big. And we knew that we were going to disrupt the category. And like I said before, it was an opportunity to lead culture forward in a positive way.
I love that. I heard several things, and as I look down, I'm taking notes here so that we make sure to go deep on these topics. But the research and talking to your customers and reframing the problem, I think we'll continue to pull the thread on those. Aku, can I turn it over to you? How do you know when you're being innovative? What does that mean to you?
For me, it's doing something new in my industry, right? I'm in the food industry, so I'm trying to solve a problem for consumers or customers. So, you know, maybe a consumer needed to drink the water a different way, or they're bored with the water, if you remember. Or we're doing something innovative in our processes, the way we put a product together, or we can be doing some different services, the way we distribute our products. So when I'm being innovative, I'm thinking about new ways or different ways to do what I'm already established doing. So one example that I like to give, and sort of disruptive or something creative that was done in the food industry, is Mio. Back in the days before the rise of this flavored water or natural water, Mio was the first one to come to the category because they identified that people were bored drinking plain water, right? So they wanted to solve that problem, and the food industry was like, who want to buy that little container and put it in the water, right? And it's like, who cares, right? Why? How do you know? But they did the research and instantly took off, and it became a huge category, and it kept growing till today. So we've been adding things to our water, flavors, natural flavors, mineral, good for you. So it's when you're doing something creative, you see that the consumer need it and the consumer wants it and they're buying it, and you make money at it. You make money doing it and you're doing it efficiently. You're happy doing it. So, and it also grows your company. So that's how I know I'm innovating.
Just a quick follow-up there. Consumers don't often ask for, how did, in that story, how do folks know what the problem is that they're working towards?
So often in my industry, what we think the consumer is asking for comes from different ways. It could be from trends, right? It could be from researches, from market researches. It could be from customers, right? So grocery stores, people give them direct feedback when they went there and they say, hey, I've seen this today and it would be nice if I had this. It could be from somebody from the company, right? That had an idea and then get tested and it's like very creative idea. And we do, in the food industry, we do a lot of testing, we cater to people, and the biggest thing we do, or the best thing we do, is put the food in people's mouth, right? So we do a lot of research, people taste them, give us the feedback. And as you see that excitement over time, and that, that's what you should be working on. So we can come up with millions of ideas from all those sources that I just named, or even nowadays with the rise of media, we can go Instagrams or all the social media platform, and you find ideas there. But in order to do a truly innovative concept, you have to test those and see if consumers are excited about them. And the second thing we do is, concepts are paper ideas, we also put in the people's mouth, and they're like, oh my god, this is awesome, this is this, and so forth and so on. That's how we come up with those ideas. And that's how we know that they want that product.
I love it. We're going to hone in on this concept of testing and fun tests, productive tests, tests that were productive because you learned you weren't going the right way, all sorts of tests. But before we get there, this concept of innovation and making sure that kind of we feel grounded in our context. Tibe, can I turn it over to you for what does innovation mean in your career, in your industry, and how do you know?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I really love the intention that you're setting here in demystifying innovation, right? So for me, the innovation is about finding new ways to create value, deliver value, and capture value, right? So create value for people, customers, constituents. It could be in any context, government, for-profit, nonprofit. Deliver value. So what's a different way of getting that value to people, and then capturing value from them? And I think at the core of it's very aligned with my co-panelists' perspectives. It's about meeting and understanding needs. We can't understand the needs until we get close and closer to the customer or to the target. So I think at the heart of innovation is really getting close to the folks you're innovating for, and meeting and sort of understanding their needs so that you can meet those needs. I think one other thing that's central to innovation, at least as I've experienced it, is constraints. Right. So there seems to be this idea that innovation is big thinking all the time, brand new idea. It has to be this big, expensive thing. A lot of innovation that I am a fan of over time has been born from constraints, right? If you look around the world in emerging markets, right, so a common example that I've used that I admire is in Kenya, where there's a lot of payment innovation just based on constraints from the limits of the internet. And so they use a lot of SMS type phones for payments, and that created a whole new category. So I think constraints are part of the equation. I think it doesn't have to be that you have unlimited funding and unlimited runway. The constraint should be an individual has, a company has, should be part of the equation when thinking about innovation.
I'd love to go there for a second and just learn more. When I think about kind of your role in an energy utility, something that perhaps has a greater monopoly than food industry or software products. How do you think about but also a huge company? How do you think about constraints in your world these days?
That's a great question. And I think, I have a sort of unique perspective in this moment, being 8 months. 8 months is about the time where you've gotten your feet wet, but you're still trying to understand the broader context. There are constraints at many levels, I think. So the mission with the job, right? So Dominion is a great company, it's an energy company, and we're looking to define what should the future be in terms of the experience for our customers, right? Customers' expectations are changing. You know, as a customer myself, I don't expect one thing from one brand and then sort of reset my expectations for another brand. I sort of come with this general expectation on how a brand should be interacting. And so we're trying to define what that should be for Dominion, but we're constrained at many levels, right? We're highly regulated, you know, and yeah, I was in insurance before this. We were regulated there, but this is a whole new level of regulation for all the obvious reasons. So there's constraints in what we can do and what we can say. There's constraints even in from a, you know, so coming internally, right? So I have this vision for our culture and being a lot more customer centric. We already are, but how do we move it to the next level? Well, there's constraints because there's only so many things people can keep in mind, right? So a big thing as part of Dominion culture is safety. We have a very strong safety culture. Well, I'd love us to have a strong safety culture. We also have a very strong like D&I culture, and we have a very strong environmental culture. And now I want to include us having a strong customer culture. That's a lot of different cultures. So even constraints in terms of capacity of people to take on this new culture, constraints in all the sort of obvious ways with, you know, we can't do everything at once, time, resources, all of those things. So in the face of all of these constraints and more, the sort of the thing that I bring and our team sort of has to keep in mind is what's our North Star, right? I think with a fixed point, there are many ways to get there. So a clear alignment on what we're solving for from a CX perspective and from an innovation perspective for the company, knowing fully well that we will, you know, we will actually use the constraints as a way to innovate to get to where we're getting to. And so I do think constraints are a very necessary part of innovation.
I love this concept of North Star, and we said this at the beginning. It may just come to you, you've got a vision, but as particularly coming into an established company, it's something that has to grow, and you've got to collaborate to figure out what that North Star is. And I heard know what you're solving for, and earlier I heard kind of talking to customers, know the problem, identify the problem. I'd love a story from each of you on how you've identified a problem for your customer. So who was the customer, and how did you get close enough to them to know what the next best problem or next most important or impactful problem to solve would be? Ashley, can I come back to you for that? Oh, you're on mute. Normally I do that first, so thank you.
Sorry, thanks. Yeah, it's a great question. So getting around constraints and getting around identifying the problem, that, you know, like I mentioned that in the first example, that almost always the problem that I am presented with in my field is almost always never what we end up working on. It's usually built on a host of assumptions not grounded in research. So the very first thing that I do in all of my engagements is empathy interviews. I start there. It really starts with connecting with the human element and talking to my clients, and not just the person, not just the point person, you know, that hired me, but everyone in the in senior leadership and even at the team level. So different altitudes, different departments, and then you really get a full picture. And then what I do is I share that out, and I don't just share it with, you know, this select few. Everybody's invited to the meeting when we talk about this, and it's always a light bulb moment for people to understand another person's perspective. It never fails to surprise me how it's almost, you know, that people just don't talk. So that, you know, so these are internal customers, right? And then, you know, obviously when you go outside the organization and you talk to external customers, just like Aku said, you learn very quickly there, you know, what's tracking, what works, what doesn't work. So I really, you know, and I really get around that, you know, defining the problem accurately by keeping, you know, I keep asking lots of questions and doing empathy interviews, and then share that out, and then invite everybody into the discussion to talk about, okay, what is the problem we're trying to solve? So yeah.
In, in these interviews, I'm going to pick up on something Aku said. It's like the feeling of excitement, or at Carmex, we call it yummy sounds. We start to get positive signals back. Is that how you hone in on what the problem to solve is? Is it a feeling? Is it a right question? I imagine if you say, what's your biggest problem today, that may not be what you end up working on 100% of the time. So how do you suss that out of an interview? What's your technique?
That's a great question. Yummy sounds. I'll have to remember that. I like that. I look for that. I look for tension points too. I look for contradictions in what people say. So quite often, leadership will say one thing and then you hear a completely different story at the team level. So though that I usually hone in on those contradictions, and I keep pressing those tension points until we find out what's really going on. And it could be that there are pockets here and there that are contradictory, but that's usually insightful. That I mean, and I look for, when you're doing research, there is a careful balance of looking for statistical significance, like is everybody saying this? Is it just one person who is contradicting? It's important to have that filter as well, just to kind of get at what's the truth, what's really going on. But it's really just kind of exposing those tension points and asking some questions, and that's really it, essentially.
Those are great points for those interviews. I'm curious, Aku, if I could hand it back to you. You spoke about research as well. How do you pick up this process?
For us, it's in a different levels, right? So because again, it's product mostly driven. If it's a product driven, this is what I'm going to talk about. We also have process driven, surface driven, but product driven is what excites most of us in the food industry. So typically, you do some sort of, background or ideations, and, have some ideas. Eventually, with your team. So this is a really cross-functional team where you have sales, you have, R&D, you have marketing. So based on what we've been hearing from, all these different sources that I cited before, some concept to be created, right? So it's a paperwork of what you think you're going to move forward with. So we usually go from like a funnel version, right? So where you go from a lot of ideas and you pick only a few ideas that you're going to move forward with. And just like was said before, some of these ideas that you end up being with is, based on the constraints that you have, right? So do you have the manufacturing to do these? Can you create the manufacturing to do these? Can you make money doing this, right? Can you do it properly? You have the men or the resources to do this, and so forth and so on. Based on that, you create a smaller list where you create concepts. So it's just a visual ways to put this product on paper and send it to consumers online. Sometimes people do it consumer online, or sometimes in person, where they will give you feedback. This is a great idea. So you're probably thinking you're doing a wrap, right? So we sent a wrap in a paper to folks, and they didn't think it was elegant to be eaten in public. It looks messy. So then you get those feedback right away, and you're like, okay, this is not what they envisioned, and so forth and so on. Based on that, you create a couple of concepts, and that is going to come out on top. So we have ratings, the likings, and then those will come out, and then those are the one you're going to focus on. So the next steps for us is create what we call prototypes. So they're not necessarily feasible products, but they're gold standard, we call them, the ideal product for people to just look at the real thing, right? They use the senses. So in the food industry, we use our senses a lot. And they look at the product, they're like, okay, this is great, and we love it, or they give you more feedback. So one thing is, like, I was working on a product one time, and it was a product with mushrooms. And mushrooms sounds very exciting, it's healthy for you, it's savory, we love it. And we gave those to a consumer on we have what we call a research, just like a small research. They came, we showed them the product. they wouldn't even touch the product. He said it was dark. They didn't think it looked appetizing at all, because the mushroom, I guess most of them don't know the mushroom when you cook them. They look very brown and dark and not that appetizing. And we didn't think about it, right, to make it look better or added something to it that looks more appetizing. So instantly we learned something. So we, and in our industry, you learn and you revisit. Is that an idea to pursue? Can we fix it? Or is that an idea to leave? Because you go in there with a couple of concepts, right? And then you leave that concept behind and so forth. So you keep refining. And then you create a prototype, which is that the actual version of it that you can make, right? And so then you show them one more time. And you also leave some on the table. You might find out at that level, which had happened before, that none of them is working. And so you go back to your big, the top of your funnel and find other ideas to bring down through the funnel again and see if you can find some innovative ideas that you're going to launch. So those are when we're doing products. So when we're doing, for example, process, it's very different. So processes are usually invisible to the consumers. They don't see what we're doing. What we're trying to do when we're doing innovative process, we're just changing something that the consumer doesn't notice. For example, you can make, we make frozen food, right? So the assembly is different, right? And so we buy new equipment that will assemble, instead of doing 100 cups a minute, 100 cups a minute, they're doing 1,000 cups a minute. But we don't want the consumer to know that, because we're doing it faster, making money at it, but they don't know that. So a lot of innovation. So if you're doing a product innovation, it goes through a lot of steps. When you're doing a process innovation, it goes through shorter processes, more of invisible to the consumer. And you have to make sure that's invisible to the consumer so they don't stop purchasing your product.
Elizabeth asked a question in the chat. So when we're talking about testing products and these food products, I love the example you gave for the mushrooms. I'm so curious, and I'm not a mushroom fan. What does that timeline look like? What, in your industry, in your field, what does the testing timeline look like from ideation to getting that first like tangible thing in front of a consumer for feedback?
Typically, we go from ideation to launch is about a year. And based on how fast you want to move, you want to do it within 6 months to 7 months. So you have time to scale up and mass produce it. But I've also been in instances where you really want to be in the market. The trend is hot, For example, we were working on, I was working on a product called avocado toast. Avocado toast was a hot thing, and we have to make it work. So the timeline only went from a year to 6 months. It's all dependent on the capability that you have. You have the resources to make it. Can you make it well? And can you actually deliver the concepts and excite the consumers, right? So once you go through all those steps, you get the feedback from the consumers, you have a great product, then you go for it. Sometimes though, because of the timeline shortened, we don't always go to paying consumers. So we've done things like creative things like using your employees to taste the product and give you feedback. So you have a concept, you have a great idea. So all the in between testing where the consumer gives you the feedback, you just use your employees to do that. So you're like, okay, the product is refined. And you go back into another, what we call CLT, central location testing. And you're like, okay, here's the product that I have. It's refined enough to think that it's there. And then we get that final feedback. And sometimes, you get really good feedback. Your product is good to go, or you don't, and you go back, and fix it. So it's all dependent on your timing in the market, whether you want to catch the trends or whether you want to create an idea that is non-existent, right? So you do have different timing based on what you're trying to achieve.
Okay. Tibe, I want to come to you next on this concept of customer centricity and building up this idea and culture of being hyper-focused on your customer. Where do you start? For folks who are listening in and they're like, yeah, I can't think of the last time we talked to a customer. What's your advice to them?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and it's an evergreen one. By no sort of real choice or force intention, I found myself in industries typically that are very quant driven, very engineering driven now, at least with Dominion, even with insurance, very actuarial driven. And so here I am, typically, an outlier in the grand scheme of things in these companies and these organizations as, let's get closer to the customer, let's feel, So I think that saying all that to say that we have to meet people where they are. And so, understanding the culture of your organization is important. Understanding the language of your organization is important. If I talk about customer centricity, for example, absent of, I would actually say Dominion Energy at the leadership level gets it, probably more than any one company I've ever observed. But I've been part of organizations where there wasn't really a clear understanding of the value even of customer experience. And so when I say speak the language of the business, you have to sort of tie it to the outcomes that the business cares about, right? So if I'm talking about the importance of getting close to the customer and delivering a better experience, and I don't make a case as to how it drives customer loyalty, which is revenue, or innovation and growth. Like if I don't make that case, it's not as clear as a message or as strong as a message. So I would think about customer centricity, not just about what the customer experience team wants to do, but really about how do we meet people where they are and speak their language, right? So one of the things that we're going to have to do over our time, the next few years, even within Dominion, is talk to servicemen and women, line men and women, and help them make the connection between what they do and customer experience. One really interesting anecdote related to that. So as I've mentioned, I've been here about 8 months, but I've done a lot of talking already with my colleagues across the organization on CX. And every single, I make the joke with the team, if we're meeting 40 people in the span of a couple of months, it's 40 different stories we're telling. It's 40 different ways of engaging. So when I'm meeting with accounting, I'm spending time before that meeting to understand accounting at the core. What is accounting? And how does accounting impact the customer experience? So when I'm coming to that conversation, I'm not saying CX is important because T-Base says it is. I'm saying, hey, as accounting, you all make decisions that impact how regulators treat us, which allows us to have a better customer. Like I'm making that connection. And it's a lot of work, to prepare for every single conversation this way. But I really think that's what the heart of customer centricity is how does each person individually, how does each group, each team, each department, each function, and how does the enterprise overall connect itself to the customer? And it's the role of the team, whether it's an innovation team, a CX team, whatever that permutation of words, because they're also related. It's the role of the team to help an organization get there.
It's striking to me as you speak, like you clearly have a passion for this. And I'm curious if you could share with the group, where does that passion or that sense of drive for the customer come from? Because it's so resounding in your voice when you talk about why it's important and communicating that in the eyes and in the language of the folks you're working with. So it's a bit of a kind of a personal, tell us what makes T-Base tick, but
it's a great question. I think it's one that I have to honestly call myself up to over and over again. So here's the secret. Me personally, I care about literally two things, nothing else. I care about how people see and treat themselves and how people see and treat each other. I think the corporate expression, I make the joke, but really the expression of that in the world, a lot is the experiences that we deliver. I actually do think that when a company or an organization delivers a bad experience, whether or not it's intention, it's sending a message to a person that you don't matter as much, or we didn't bother to take the time to understand your needs, so just deal with it. And that's not usually what organizations intend, but that is the message, right? As a recipient of experiences that have not been great, or of observed people get experiences that have not been great, not been human, not been sensitive, that's what they take away, right? We have to, always remember humans are both rational and emotional. And so the meaning behind the experiences is what drives me. And so my goal, particularly with industries and companies that may not have historically thought about these things, right? There are some industries where from the ground up, they were built, sort of to be human-centered. And so there's some that haven't. I found myself drawn to those opportunities to help. It's not a one-woman show by any stretch, but to partner within the organization to help us all sort of see the customer differently. I think same thing with innovation is more of a mindset. When we start to see our customers, our users, or our constituents differently, as when we start to see them in a more elevated way, naturally the outcome is innovation. We're looking for how do we meet their needs? How do we understand those needs? How do we serve them better? That's the natural outcome of that perspective. So I'm solving primarily for those two things as a person, and then the job follows, I think.
I love that. Thank you for sharing. I'm going to open this one up for whoever wants to jump in. So raise your hand, just start talking. There's only kind of a small group of 3, so this can be conversational. Tell me a story about a test you ran. So we heard about mushrooms, we heard about the interviews for women investing. This concept of testing and knowing how to validate your idea. Can you just pick a story from your experiences and share it with the group? Anyone want to jump in on a fun test you've run? Maybe fun because it didn't go well.
I'll start. I really like Aku's answer about concept testing. That's something that I try to do immediately because I think, again, I was talking about going in with empathy interviews and starting that way. And sometimes when you are relying really heavily on dialogue, you could be missing some things. So I like to use projective techniques, and one of those is concept testing. And then just consumers don't always know what they want. So if you're explaining things to them, it's hard for them to really grasp the concept. But if they see a visual, or like Aku said, if they taste something, or even just like see the packaging, it automatically evokes a lot of richer storytelling and reactions. I really liked what you reminding us that concept tests don't have to come at the end when you have a very high fidelity prototype. You can launch with that. If this is the issue, what do you think of? And I don't have exciting food examples, but like I recently designed an apprenticeship program for a large, billion-dollar client. And, instead of explaining all around it, and then we would do this and this, and, I just, showed them a visual, a map, and they could get it. And I think that's a good research tool oftentimes.
How do you know it's the right moment to go from idea to something on paper? And it could be a visual, or it could be kind of a cutout. I mean, it could be anything. What's your gut feel there?
Yeah, I guess there's probably a more scientific way to describe it, but it ends up usually being a gut feel. And because you can, the risk that you run is if you're showing something too early, then you could lead everybody down the wrong path, right? But I don't just show one thing. I usually show 3. I try to triangulate and show 3 very different concepts, and knowing that what you end up with will be very different from that. It could be an amalgamation of that. One might be, be thrown away early on, but I do think that it's okay to go in early with concept tests and tease out, like I said before, the tension points and try it that way.
So this showing one thing versus showing 3 things, I imagine, has a very different conversation. It's like, is this good? Will this work? Are yes or no questions versus which of these do you like better and why? Or which of these won't work and why? Talk to me a little bit about those kinds of conversations, if you can.
Sure. So, and it's usually the way that I pose it is never here is the static idea. I usually ask them I pull on elements of it. So, for example, with the apprenticeship program, there was a mentorship component of it. There's a content component of it. There's we talked about timing and all different kinds of things, and then when I presented a whole different model, which was what we call the Sherpa model, like forget about the apprenticeship program, we're going to airdrop a design thinking expert into one of your projects and just have them lead by example and have people learn in that way. And so they were, I guess the key there is that they would be very different concepts, very different ways to kind of address the same problem. And then you entice people by talking about what does any of this sound familiar? What have you done before that maybe has worked in this way, or what hasn't, or culturally? Because a lot of ideas. I work a lot with internal customers and internal culture and processes in an organization, and a lot of times it may be a fabulous idea. I may think it's a fabulous idea, but if it's not going to take in that culture, it's just not going to take for a variety of reasons. And I should preface this by saying, before we even get to the concept stage, I'm co-creating with my partner. So this is not Ashley, working really hard by herself. I am pulling together a team of diverse backgrounds and perspectives to come up with these ideas. So hope that helps.
Yeah, that's great. As you're speaking, we're getting a lot in the early stages. I don't want to leave this conversation without, what's the end of this look like? And talk to me about product launch and what that day feels like, what you're doing with your team. I imagine there's some feedback cycles in there, but that's a hypothesis. So Aku, can I have you tell us that end of product, and end of, like it never ends, but you know what I'm saying.
Yeah, so in my industry, end of a product launch looks very intense. So you've received the feedback from the consumer. You now know that you have a great product, and now you have to scale it up. And most of the time, if you think about it, in our industry, you're making a sauce in a kitchen. You start with making it like 1,000 grams, which is a kilogram, and then you make it in the pilot plants in with like maybe 100 pounds, and then when you scale it up, you're making 12,000 pounds of it. Things happens that don't happen in the kitchen, or doesn't happen in the pilot plant. So you're spending a lot of time making sure that whatever we send out there to the plant, that they can make it and they can manufacture it. So you can also ship it to the store, and the store, whatever the sales folks sold are what we actually delivering. A lot of that. We also talk a lot about sales goals, right? So how much of it can you sell? Are you making it profitable? Those are the time you find out that you can actually make money at it, or you can't. Your technology is not ready, and things like that. So there's a lot of hot flashes to going on, if I want to call it that way, because people are nervous, right? So can we do this? Can we do it faster? And then can we also take it to the store? So some crazy stories happens where you promise the store that you're going to deliver in a certain day, right? And then your equipment that you started, you set up the equipment, it's good to go, and something goes wrong, and you're not very familiar with the equipment because it's new. So a pandemic happens, so you're going to have to get somebody from England to come and fix this equipment. So that means that your deadline is off. And how do you explain to the customer, which is like a grocery store or something like that, that you're not going to make the time in? Or can you get people, throw people at it, and can they manually do it, so at least you don't miss that deadline? Because it's a new product launch, you don't want to not meet your deadline. So it looks very hectic. Looks you're talking about money, you're talking about how you're making it, you're talking about your goals. So you set up your final goals before you go to markets, right? So how much I'm going to make of it, how much my profits is, what's my total sale, how many units should I expect out of each store to make my sales goal, and then how am I going to check in the future, making sure that I'm meeting those goals. So a product launch is a lot of discussion, a lot of heavy work on the operation side, and also a lot of heavy work on the technical side. And in our side, just making sure the product reflects what we promise it's going to be.
How would you describe that in terms of the feelings that you have as a product innovator and the leader of some of this process? I mean, I know that once you're making it at scale, I would be very impressed if you're actually making the sauce or the food product. What is the accountability? What's the fear? What's the risk? What's the management? How does that all culminate in you as a leader of this cool thing that's being brought to life?
the feeling is of pride, right? Because you've actually made it, right? Because if you imagine you could go through all the testing and not make anything out of it. So getting to that level where you're going to launch is actually a big deal. Yeah, that means that you're making it, right? You're going to be in market, you're going to show something to the consumer that could be the next big thing. There's a little bit of fear that it may not work, right? Because I have an example that I've gave a lot of people in the past, and it's a very ideal example. So I worked on a product in the past where this product, the development of it was like a dream for any company. You know, we not only we had a patent out of it because it was the product design was so great. The consumer testing all, you know, directly said this is top of the line, you should do it because it's going to make a lot of money, right? So, you know, the organization was happy, they put a lot of sales goal on it, and the product did not make it through market, right? So you always had that fear in the back of your mind that, you know, you've done all you're supposed to do, but that doesn't guarantee success, right? So those are the feeling that you have, a little bit of pride that you created what you say you're going to do, a little bit of, you know, a little bit of concerns that what if it doesn't make it, what's your backup plan? And also, you know, getting all this, the people that work with you excited that they're finally going to do what they said they're going to do. The plant is delivering what they said they're going to do. So it's more of a like a kumbaya moment where everybody's excited that we're finally going to show up there and it's going to work out. But there's always things that happen, so that you have a little bit of fear.
Tive, can I come down to you for, again, I think this circles back really nicely to constraints. There's just always things that happen. As you think about your role, are there stories there that resonate with you in terms of we had a great idea and something happened?
Yeah, something is always happening for sure. Yeah, I think of yeah, I mean, it's funny, something happened at each step of the journey, right? I think Ashley made a point earlier that oftentimes what we set out to solve is not the problem we're solving for. The interesting thing with being in corporate environments sometimes is that the problem is sort of handed to you or defined to you by a senior leader as they understand it. When you do some digging, you realize that's not quite the problem. And so you're both managing that expectation as well as sort of trying to solve for what's best for the customer. I think the incidents that come to mind, just in response to your question, are moments where we started with research or started with testing or validation, and lo and behold, the customers described a very different problem. It happened when I was in insurance at MetLife. Just from a context perspective, the problem was we were finding that customers were not using, this is an app sort of feature, so customers were not using the customer service app that we created to sort of solve some basic problems. They were calling the call center a lot, and so we sort of set out to find out why. And in doing that, not only did it reveal that the app had a lot to be desired in terms of its user friendliness, customers did not seize, they used that opportunity, and this was in a very specific country within MetLife, but they used that opportunity to tell us how even before they got to the point where they needed to solve this customer service problem, how we had made their lives a lot more difficult, right? So there's I think for me, especially being in these sort of internal roles, the things that come up are usually about how do we deliver hard messages to different parts of the organization, and how do we sort of keep the integrity of the project intact and solving what's best for the customer, but also bringing people along in a way where no one's quote unquote offended by what the finding is and what the result is. Of course, there are always projects where, resources are constrained. There are projects where you have a sprint team of people, but no one's, how you're supposed to be fully dedicated. It's always fully dedicated, and it's harder to get people to sort of do the work as in the intensity with the commitment as you want. So those things come up. think the challenges that I've seen mostly are when something's scoped as A, and then we get to it and it's elemental PQ, and how do we sort of course correct, but while solving the problem, but also managing expectations broadly.
And I'll stay with you, Tibe, for the next question, which just came in the chat. Thank you so much, Kelly. Just for each of you, and we'll go around fully for this one, is this is the rvatech conference. Yeah. How important is technology when you think about innovation in your role in particular? I heard a lot of techniques today that quite frankly didn't involve tech. So I'm curious.
It's very important on all the spheres that you would imagine, right? So when I think of technology in sort of the broadest sense, from how we collaborate to even to your point, not all the techniques, but a lot of these techniques, right? So, rely on technology. I think even more the delivery of the solution. So if innovation is about creating and delivering solutions in a different way, increasingly rely on technology. It's not, there's no industry, utilities as well, insurance as well, that can sort of bury its head in the sand and say, we're going to keep things the way they've been. We're going to keep expecting people to have fax machines and fax things to us. And so technology is extremely important. I think one of the big things, if I can even sort of mention within Dominion in my 8 months, is that's a huge focus from an investment perspective for Dominion Energy, is because we know that there's only so much ideation and strategy and planning that we can do, that investment in the capabilities to be able to deliver it to customers is important, even from an internal perspective, from the call center, for example, technology to enable the reps to be able to deliver a quick and better customer experience. So it's critically important in both the what and the how.
Ashley, same question.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I think it's so critical. And the reason that I would give, as I've seen over the course of time, is it used to be that technology was the thing that delighted customers, but it wasn't we have to have that. Now, because of the pace of technology, brands, companies, not only are customers willing to try new technology for a brand that they've never heard of, but they expect it. So if you are Dominion Energy or whatever your organization, if you are not infusing your interaction with your customers in a high-tech way, the impression that's given is, well, they're not really with the times, or they are outdated, or they are not for me. I'm going to go somewhere where I can do it on this nifty little app, or use it, use technology in a new way. That is the demand. That's the expectation. It's not, it's kind of a barrier to entry now. So if you're sort of resting on your laurels and you're not thinking about what your customers' experience is from a technological standpoint, I think you run the risk of being, relegated to obscurity. That's a big statement, but I think it's true. And I think it's really interesting to hear, when you were talking about Dominion Energy and how you are, well, you were giving an example about MetLife, but I'm sure you do this at Dominion Energy too. Like, you have a captive audience, Tibe. I mean, a lot of companies with a captive audience just think, we'll do what we can, but we're not going to focus on delivering a premium experience through technology. And for the fact that Dominion Energy that's impressive, because a lot of people would think that you wouldn't have to. And I think customers appreciate that, and it sets you apart.
So very well said. And I know, Jessica, you're about to jump in, but I want to agree. And I think what tends to happen, I love that you said relegated to obscurity. I'm going to use that somewhere. Is that not just impacts that customer's experience for that transaction. There's a horn effect. So the opposite of a halo effect, right? Where the brand is seen as obscure. And then it starts to impede things like trust, right? Because again, we as humans are not always rational. So if sometimes I'll see a website that's really outdated, and I will actually make an assessment on the company's capabilities based on that. So it's important for all those reasons. I completely agree.
I wish horn effect had come up 20 minutes ago. We'd be talking about that. So many good things. Aku, can I turn it back to you for the same technology lens on how that influences both your style of innovation and your approach, as well as what you're innovating?
Yeah, I mean, in our industry, it's the communication, just like the other people talk about. How you communicate to the consumers, how you show your product to the consumers. But it goes as deep as how we test our concepts, how we ideate it, right? Like sometimes nowadays nobody want to go on a site to do an ideation. You do it virtually, right? So you have to have the technology in place. You have to do there's a term for it. It's like the concepts are tested that way. We also have to have technologies, research technologies ready for us to make products. An interesting example that I use from when I was in grad school, we use a paint technology, like a car painting technology to coat French fries. You know how you get your French fries beautifully brown, how they apply that color to it. And that technology came from the painting industry, how they smoothly put it on. So we're not only looking for technology in every aspect of how we sell food, but we also are looking for technology how we make food, how we do it better, so the consumer is satisfied with it, because consumers don't necessarily understand where food come from, how it's supposed to be, and we have to make it so it's acceptable to them. So if, for example, when you go to McDonald's, your French fries beautiful and crispy, and you go to some mom and pop shop, it's lumpy. The consumer doesn't understand how that happens. They just assume that your potatoes something was wrong with your potato. They don't understand that you put some technological advances in that potato, so it looks crispy, it tastes crispy, so forth and so on. So in our area, we're keep renovating all the time, not only like the way it's done in the service industry, but it's also done in the product industry. And so that's some of my aspects, my way of explaining it, if it makes sense.
That's great. So with that, I'll share my screen, because we don't want anyone to leave without knowing how next to get in touch or get more of this great content. So there is, on the RVA Drive series, summer events that I hope you'll consider joining, and all of this will be emailed out. All of this is leading up to a November conference where we hope to see our panelists and everyone in the audience and more and participating and continuing this conversation about innovation. And then a quick plug is you have innovation and innovators, and then engineering, as we talked about technology, brings some of this to life. So we're going to be having a session at the end of the month to talk about engineering. And really, truly, from the bottom of my heart, I think this panel has been fantastic, and we do want to leave you on a purposeful cliffhanger to join us after the break with our speakers. Ashley, Tibe, Aku, just phenomenal storytelling. I have so many quotes that you will find on LinkedIn later about your roles in innovation relegated to obscurity. There's not an industry out there that can put its head in the sand and say, we're going to keep doing things the way we've been doing them. Having that North Star, I've gained a lot out of today, and I hope our audience feels the same way. Thank you, thank you, thank you for sharing your stories and experiences with us.